For most of my life, I considered myself a fortunate man. I had built my success from the ground up, watched my efforts turn into something tangible, and most importantly, found someone who made all of it feel worthwhile. Emily was the kind of woman people noticed when she entered a room, not just because of her beauty but because she carried herself with confidence and ease. When we first met, I was immediately drawn to her, not just in the way a man notices an attractive woman, but in a way that made me want to know everything about her. Our story started like any other. We met at a friend's engagement party, both of us in our mid-20s, both at the beginning of promising careers. I was deep in the grind of building my company, pouring every ounce of energy into turning a small business into something meaningful. Emily, on the other hand, had a steady job in marketing, excelling in a field that required charm, wit, and the ability to navigate complicated social landscapes. She was smart, driven, and had a way of making people feel comfortable around her. That night, we talked for hours, and by the end of it, I knew I didn't want it to be the last time I saw her. The first few years of our relationship were filled with late-night phone calls, spontaneous road trips, and small moments that made life feel cinematic. We didn't have much money back then, but it didn't matter. We made it work, promising each other that someday, things would be different. And they were. By the time I was 30, my company had started taking off, and Emily was there every step of the way. She understood my long hours, the pressure, the sacrifices. She never once made me feel guilty for putting in the time I needed to make things work. Instead, she encouraged me, reminding me why I was doing it in the first place. Marriage came naturally for us. We had built a solid foundation, and when I proposed, there was no hesitation. Our wedding was beautiful but not extravagant. It was never about putting on a show, it was about us. And for years, it felt like we had exactly what we wanted. We worked hard, played hard, and made sure to enjoy the life we were creating together. As my business grew, so did our lifestyle. We moved into a larger house, one that we filled with carefully chosen furniture and memories. Emily eventually left her old job and joined my company, taking on a role in public relations. It made sense. She was a natural at handling people, at smoothing over issues, at ensuring our company's image remained flawless. I loved working with her, coming home to her, planning our future together. Everything felt solid. Unshakable. We traveled often, making sure to carve out time for ourselves despite our demanding schedules. Weekends in wine country, beach getaways, ski trips in the winter. We had a good balance, a rhythm that worked for us. Emily had always been more social than me, thriving in crowds, making friends effortlessly, while I was more reserved, content to watch from the sidelines. But together, we complemented each other. She brought lightness to my intensity, and I grounded her when things became overwhelming. If anyone had asked me back then what made our marriage work, I would have said trust. We had built something that felt unbreakable because we knew each other inside and out. We had survived the struggles of starting a life from scratch, we had celebrated victories together, and we had always been honest with each other. At least, that's what I believed. The years passed in a blur of ambition, success, and a steady rhythm of life that felt, to me, like the very definition of stability. I was a man who believed in structure, in the idea that if you worked hard and remained loyal to the people who mattered, life would reward you in kind. Emily and I had built a marriage on that foundation: trust, support, and the shared belief that we were building something together, something permanent. We were never the couple who argued over small things. If there was an issue, we talked about it. Emily had a way of diffusing tension with a single look, a soft smile that told me whatever disagreement we had wasn't worth ruining the night over. She was patient where I was prone to stress, understanding when I became consumed with work. And in return, I made sure she never felt neglected. I took her to nice dinners, surprised her with little getaways, and always reminded her that she was my priority. Our home was a reflection of us, warm, elegant, and designed with intention. We had spent months choosing everything together, from the deep leather couch in the living room to the oversized bed where we spent lazy Sunday mornings wrapped in each other's arms. It wasn't just a house, it was a place filled with laughter, whispered secrets, and the quiet comfort of knowing that, at the end of the day, we had each other. Emily flourished in her role at my company. She handled clients with ease, effortlessly building relationships that helped elevate our business. I was proud of her, not just as my wife but as someone who had carved out her own space in a competitive world. People respected her, admired her, and I saw no reason to ever question the dynamics of our marriage. We entertained often, hosting dinner parties where Emily was the star of the evening. She had a way of making guests feel special, of drawing people in with her charm and effortless conversation. She belonged in those settings, thriving in the energy of a full room, while I was content to observe, to enjoy the sight of her happiness from across the table. I always thought of us as a team, her the warmth and energy, me the quiet anchor. Looking back, I wonder if I ever truly saw her. Not just the version of Emily I had built in my mind, the woman who laughed at my jokes and curled into my side at night, but the real person beneath all of it. We had been married for over a decade, and in my mind, that meant we had moved past the uncertainties, the growing pains. We were solid. We were permanent. There were moments, though, small, fleeting instances, that might have told me otherwise had I been paying attention. Like the way she sometimes hesitated before answering when I asked about her day, or the way she stared a little too long at her reflection when she thought I wasn't looking. The way she had started choosing her words more carefully, as if weighing them before speaking. But I was never the kind of man to dwell on uncertainties. I had faith in my wife, in our marriage. And so I dismissed those thoughts as nothing more than passing worries, the kind that come and go in any long-term relationship. After all, Emily loved me. She had told me so 1,000 times, and I had no reason to doubt her. No reason at all. Time has a way of softening the edges of a marriage. The intensity of those early years, when every touch felt electric and every moment together was filled with endless conversation, gradually gives way to something quieter. Not lesser, just different. A kind of comfort that comes with knowing someone so deeply that words aren't always necessary. That's what I thought Emily and I had. A love that had settled into something steady, something safe. We had a routine, one that worked for us. Mornings were a quiet affair. I'd wake up first, head downstairs to make coffee, and by the time she joined me, I'd already be dressed for work. She was never much of a morning person, always taking her time, wrapped in a robe, sipping her coffee while scrolling through her phone. I'd kiss her goodbye, tell her I'd see her later, and that was that. Our days were busy. I ran the company, handling the logistical and financial aspects, while Emily took care of our public relations. We had meetings, deadlines, responsibilities that kept us both occupied. But we always came back to each other. That's what mattered. Evenings were where we reconnected. I made a point of keeping my work at the office, knowing that if I let it bleed into our home life, it would consume me. Emily was the same way, at least, she used to be. We'd sit down for dinner together, sometimes at home, sometimes at a restaurant, depending on our moods. We'd talk, laugh, drink wine. She'd tell me about the ridiculous demands of certain clients, and I'd share whatever new challenge I was dealing with. It was easy. Familiar. And then there were the weekends. Saturdays were ours. No work, no obligations, just time together. We'd go for drives, visit new restaurants, sometimes just stay home and do nothing at all. Emily loved those days, said they reminded her of when we first started dating. Sundays were usually spent with friends or family, hosting or being hosted, a steady cycle of social engagements that Emily enjoyed far more than I did. But I never minded. Seeing her happy was enough for me. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I never expected it to be. We had disagreements, of course, small things, fleeting moments of frustration that passed as quickly as they came. But we never fought in a way that left scars. We always found our way back to each other. That's what I held on to. The belief that no matter what, Emily and I were unshakable. So, when things started changing, I didn't notice right away. Or maybe I just didn't want to. The shifts were subtle, the kind that could be easily explained away: stress, exhaustion, the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. and I had my own distractions. The company was growing, demanding more of my time and energy. I wasn't looking for signs of trouble. I didn't think I needed to. If someone had told me then that my marriage was already unraveling, that the foundation I had built my life on was beginning to crack beneath me, I wouldn't have believed them. Because Emily was my wife. My partner. The one person in this world I never thought would betray me. I see it all so clearly now, but back then? I was blind. Willfully, foolishly blind. Looking back, I wonder how long it had been going on before I noticed. How many nights had I fallen asleep next to her, completely unaware that I was already losing her? How many mornings had I kissed her goodbye while she carried the weight of her deception, smiling at me as if nothing had changed? It started with small things, so subtle that they barely registered. A late night at the office here, a weekend work event there. None of it seemed unusual at first. Emily had always been busy. Her role at the company required networking, attending events, meeting with clients. But there was a shift, a quiet change in her patterns that I couldn't quite place. She started dressing differently, putting more effort into her appearance, even on days when she had no meetings scheduled. She bought new lingerie, the kind she hadn't worn in years, but I never saw her wear it for me. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. That these changes were normal, that she was simply taking better care of herself. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. Because the alternative, that the woman I had spent over a decade loving, trusting, and building a life with was hiding something from me, was unthinkable. But the signs kept coming. She started guarding her phone more closely, keeping it face down on the table, taking calls in another room. Texts that she would glance at and ignore when I was nearby, only to respond to them when she thought I wasn't looking. And then there were the unexplained absences. Nights when she claimed to be out with friends but came home later than usual, the faint scent of cologne clinging to her clothes. I told myself it was nothing. That I was being paranoid. That Emily would never do that to me. But then, one night, I caught her in a lie. She had told me she was meeting some colleagues for dinner, an industry thing, nothing personal. I didn't question it. But hours later, when I casually mentioned it to one of her coworkers at an event, he gave me a confused look. He hadn't heard about any dinner. He hadn't seen her all evening. Something in my stomach twisted. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I watched. I observed. And the more I paid attention, the more the patterns became clear. She wasn't just pulling away, she was hiding something. I still remember the moment when denial stopped being an option. It was late, past midnight, and Emily had come home after another work dinner. I had been waiting for her, pretending to be asleep as I listened to her quietly move around the room. I opened my eyes just enough to watch as she undressed, peeling off her dress, slipping out of lace-trimmed underwear I had never seen before. I watched her check her phone one last time before plugging it in to charge, a faint smile flickering across her lips at whatever she saw on the screen. That was the moment. The moment I knew. Something was happening. Something was wrong. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly afraid. Something felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but there was a shift between us, an invisible wall that hadn't been there before. I told myself it was just stress, that maybe work had been taking too much of my attention, that Emily was just going through something she hadn't voiced yet. But deep down, I knew better. She had become distant in ways that weren't obvious but were unmistakable once I started noticing them. The small things added up. The way she no longer reached for my hand absent-mindedly when we sat on the couch. The way she avoided eye contact during conversations, like she was carrying a secret too heavy to meet my gaze. The way she no longer lingered in bed with me in the mornings but instead got up quickly, as if lying beside me for too long made her uncomfortable. It was the phone, though, that set off the first real warning bells. Emily had never been secretive about her phone before. She used to leave it lying around the house without a second thought. But lately it never left her side. It was always face down on the table, notifications muted, and when she thought I wasn't looking, I saw the way her fingers lingered over the screen, typing out messages before locking it and slipping it into her pocket. I told myself not to make assumptions. There could be 100 reasons for the change. Maybe she was dealing with something personal she wasn't ready to share. Maybe I had done something to push her away without realizing it. The thought that something deeper, something irreversible, was happening between us felt too terrifying to acknowledge. I tried harder. I took her out to dinner more often, planned weekends away, reminded her of the life we had built. I searched for the warmth that used to be there, the easy comfort we once shared, but it felt like grasping at something slipping through my fingers. She smiled when she needed to, laughed at the right moments, but something about it felt off. Like she was playing a role instead of just being with me. Then came the excuses. Late nights at work, sudden changes in plans, last-minute cancellations. Emily had always been social, always had a full calendar, but now there were more nights apart than together. When she was home, she seemed distracted, constantly checking the time, as if waiting for something, or someone. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband. I didn't want to be the kind of man who read too much into things, who let jealousy and fear cloud his judgment. So I pushed it down. I ignored the tightness in my chest every time she walked out the door, the uneasy feeling that settled in my stomach when I kissed her goodbye. But doubt has a way of seeping into everything, no matter how much you try to contain it. And the more I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, the more I realized that I was lying to myself. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what. The days blurred together, a constant cycle of routine and unease. Every morning, I woke up beside Emily, kissed her on the forehead, and told myself that everything was fine. Every night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing deep down that it wasn't. The weight of uncertainty had settled into my bones, making every moment feel heavier, every glance in her direction feel like an unanswered question. She was careful, too careful. She still played the part of the devoted wife, but the details were slipping. There were gaps in her stories, slight inconsistencies that might have gone unnoticed if I hadn't already been looking for them. She would say she was meeting friends for drinks, but when I asked how it went, she would fumble for an answer, pausing for a beat too long before responding. She would claim to be exhausted from work but would disappear into the bathroom for an hour at night, her phone in hand, her face unreadable when she finally emerged. The distance between us had grown into something I couldn't ignore. I reached for her in bed, and she tensed before relaxing, as if she had to remind herself to respond. I tried to kiss her, to pull her close, but there was a hesitation, a slowness in the way she touched me back, like someone going through the motions rather than wanting to be there. I started questioning myself. Was I imagining this? Was I reading too much into things? Maybe she really was just overwhelmed. Maybe the stress of life had drained her, made her less present, less engaged. But my gut told me otherwise. And the gut never lies. She had become more protective of her time. Before, we used to share everything, our schedules, our plans, even the little details of our days. Now she was vague. Plans were always last minute, explanations were kept short, and when I asked too many questions, she would brush them off with a casual, "It's nothing, don't worry." But I was worried. I was drowning in it. I tried to focus on work, on my company, on anything that would keep my mind from spiraling down the path I knew it was heading toward. But even at the office, I found myself distracted. I would stare at my phone, waiting for a text from her that never came. I would wonder where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. I had never been that man before, the kind who doubted, who obsessed, who let jealousy creep into his thoughts. I hated it. I hated feeling this way. But I couldn't stop. One night, I decided to test something. I told her I had a late meeting at work, that I wouldn't be home until much later. She barely reacted, just nodded and told me to drive safe. No protest, no disappointment, no attempt to make other plans so we could spend time together. If anything, she looked relieved. So I left. But instead of going to the office, I drove around for an hour, sitting in a dark parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. That when I returned home, she would be there, curled up on the couch, watching TV like she always did. That I would walk in and feel stupid for ever doubting her. But when I finally pulled back into the driveway and stepped inside, the house was dark. Silent. Emily wasn't home. And she hadn't even bothered to lie about it. That night, I sat alone in the dark, the silence of the house pressing in around me. I had been lying to myself for weeks, telling myself that I was just imagining things, that Emily was the same woman I had always known, that our life together was still what it had always been. But the truth was undeniable now. She wasn't home. She hadn't even made an excuse. No fake work dinner, no meeting with friends, no hastily written text to keep up appearances. Just absence. And in that absence, the final, undeniable confirmation that something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. I checked my phone. Nothing. I wanted to call her, to demand an answer, to ask her where she was, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the realization that I wasn't ready to hear the lie she would come up with. Because that's all it would be, a lie. So I waited. And with every passing minute, my mind filled with the possibilities of where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. I had never considered myself a jealous man, never had reason to be. Emily had always been mine, and I had always been hers. But now, for the first time, I felt it, the deep, sickening twist of jealousy, the weight of betrayal settling into my chest like a stone. Hours passed before I heard her car pull into the driveway. I sat motionless in the living room as the door opened and she stepped inside. She hesitated when she saw me, just for a second, before forcing a smile, acting as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Hey," she said, setting her purse down. "I didn't expect you to be home this early." I just looked at her. Studied her. Her hair was slightly tousled, her lipstick faded but still there, the faint scent of perfume, stronger than usual, lingering around her. I wondered if she had looked like this for someone else just hours ago. If she had smiled at another man the way she used to smile at me. I wanted to ask her where she had been. I wanted to press her, to demand an explanation, to force her into a corner where she had no choice but to tell me the truth. But instead I just nodded, playing the same game she was playing, pretending like I wasn't drowning in doubt. Because I wasn't going to ask. I wasn't going to give her the chance to lie to me again. Instead, I was going to find out the truth for myself. And when I did, there would be no more pretending. I had reached my limit. The uncertainty, the doubt, the endless cycle of questions with no answers, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know. Not just suspect, not just assume, but know. Confronting Emily wouldn't work. She was too careful, too composed. If I asked, she would lie. She would smile, stroke my arm, and tell me that I was imagining things, that I was overthinking. And I'd be left feeling like the fool, forced to pretend that the knot in my stomach wasn't there. No, I wouldn't give her that chance. I had to see it with my own eyes. The decision wasn't easy, but by the time I made it, I felt no hesitation. I went online, did my research, and within days I had everything I needed. Small, nearly invisible cameras, easily hidden, with high-definition recording and motion detection. They were designed for home security, but tonight they would serve a different purpose. Emily had been leaving work, late, more often, and that gave me the perfect opportunity. The moment she walked out the door, I went to work. I placed one camera on the bookshelf, nestled between old photo frames and decorative pieces, angled perfectly toward the bed. Another went inside the closet, hidden between boxes on the top shelf. The last one, the smallest of them all, I secured under the nightstand, capturing the entire room from a low angle. My hands were steady as I worked. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. I had spent weeks in torment, questioning my own sanity, feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. But now I felt calm. Focused. Because soon the truth would be mine. When I was done, I stepped back and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place. The bedroom looked exactly the same as it had that morning. But now, it wasn't just a room. It was a trap. That night, I lay beside Emily, listening to her breathe as she slept. I should have felt guilty. A better man, a more trusting husband, might have. But I didn't. Because trust is something that has to be earned, and Emily had given me every reason to doubt her. The cameras were set. The stage was ready. All that was left was to wait. And when the truth finally came, I would be ready. The next morning, Emily left early, claiming she had a meeting across town. I nodded, watching her go, my face blank, my heart pounding. The cameras were running. By the time she returned home that evening, I would have my answer. I spent the entire day pretending to work, pretending to care about meetings and emails while my mind was consumed with one thing: what I would find on those recordings. Time crawled, every hour stretching endlessly as I fought the urge to check my phone, to watch the footage before I was ready. But I waited. I needed to be in the right frame of mind. I needed to be able to see the truth and accept it. By the time I got home, Emily was already there, cooking dinner like it was just another normal night. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, smiled at me across the table as if everything was fine. It made me sick. I played along, ate my food, laughed at the right moments, acted like a husband who wasn't hiding something. But the moment Emily went upstairs to shower, I retrieved my phone, opened the security app, and loaded the footage. The first few hours were uneventful. Just an empty bedroom, the usual stillness of a house at rest. Then, at 3:12 p.m., the motion detector caught something. I pressed play. Emily walked into the bedroom, alone at first. She checked her phone, her posture tense, her movements quick. She adjusted the pillows, smoothed out the blankets, preparing. Then she left the frame. For a second, there was nothing. And then he walked in. A man. Younger than me. Dark hair, well-dressed, moving with the kind of confidence that told me this wasn't the first time he had been in my home. My bedroom. I felt nothing at first. Just a strange, detached numbness as I watched them. The way she smiled at him, the way she reached for him without hesitation, the way her body pressed against his like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like she had done it 100 times before. Then came the rage. Slow, creeping, unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just the act itself, it was everything. The months of lies. The late nights. The dismissive smiles when I had dared to ask questions. The way she had looked me in the eye every single day and made me believe I was crazy for doubting her. I clenched my phone so hard my fingers ached. I wanted to smash it against the wall. I wanted to storm upstairs, rip the truth out of her, watch her crumble as she realized I knew everything. But I didn't move. Because now, it wasn't just about the truth. Now, it was about revenge. Emily had made a fool out of me. Humiliated me in my own home, in my own bed. But she had no idea that her time was up. I stared at the screen, watching them like I was watching strangers. By tomorrow, her life would never be the same again. Revenge wasn't just an impulse, it was a necessity. Emily had taken everything I believed in, everything I had built, and shattered it. She had smiled in my face while sneaking behind my back, slept beside me every night while sharing herself with another man in our bed. The moment I saw that footage, something inside me snapped. I didn't confront her right away. No, that would have been too easy. Too merciful. Instead, I planned. If she had spent months weaving her lies, then I could spend a little time making sure she paid for them. The first step was the company. Emily worked for me, a position she had only because I had trusted her. That ended now. The next morning, I made a call to HR. Effective immediately, Emily was fired. No warnings, no conversations, no negotiations. By the time she arrived at the office, security had already been instructed to escort her out. I didn't stay to watch her reaction. I didn't need to. Her call started almost instantly, my phone vibrating with message after message. At first, it was confusion. Then anger. Then, predictably pleading. I didn't answer a single one. I went home early that day. Not to see her, to erase her. I packed her things with a cold, mechanical efficiency, dumping her clothes into garbage bags, throwing her expensive perfumes and jewelry into a box with no care for what broke. Every trace of her, every piece of her carefully curated life, was removed. Then, for the final touch, I opened the bedroom window. One by one, I threw her things out, onto the lawn, into the street, letting them scatter like the remnants of the life she had so carelessly destroyed. Designer shoes, handbags, dresses, everything she had once valued, everything she had worn while betraying me, worthless now. By the time Emily arrived home, it was already done. I stood at the doorway as she pulled into the driveway, her face frozen in shock as she saw her belongings strewn across the yard. She rushed toward me, panic in her eyes. "What the hell is going on?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply held up my phone, pressed play on the footage, and watched as every bit of color drained from her face. She opened her mouth, some pathetic excuse already forming, but I didn't let her speak. "Get out," I said. She stared at me, like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. Good. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was the man who was about to ruin her. Emily didn't move at first. She just stood there, her face pale, her eyes darting between me and the wreckage of her things scattered across the yard. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, how to spin this, how to regain control. But there was nothing left to manipulate. Nothing left to salvage. "Please," she finally whispered, voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I laughed. Actually laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound, because there was nothing left to say. Emily had spent months lying to my face, sneaking around behind my back, humiliating me in my own home, and now she wanted to talk? I stepped forward, lowering my voice just enough that she had to strain to hear me. "You had plenty of time to talk, Emily. Every night you came home from him, and kissed me like nothing was wrong. Every time you smiled and told me you loved me. Every single moment you had the chance to tell the truth. I leaned in, watching her flinch. And you chose to lie." Her lips parted, another excuse or plea ready to spill out, but I was already done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope I had prepared that morning, divorce papers. Signed, sealed, and ready. I threw them at her feet. "You can have him now," I said. "See how long he sticks around once he realizes you've lost everything." Her breath hitched, and I saw the exact moment reality hit her. The job? Gone. The security? Gone. The house? Mine. She had gambled everything on her little affair, thinking I'd never find out, thinking I'd be too blind or too weak to do anything about it. She was wrong. Tears welled in her eyes. Maybe they were real, maybe they weren't. I didn't care. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. I smiled, slow and deliberate. I already did. I turned and walked back inside, slamming the door in her face. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. By the next morning, she was gone. The house was quiet again. Peaceful. For the first time in months, I could breathe. And that was the end of us. And the beginning of me.